to the third episode of Season 5 of the 98% Life After Prison podcast, a show dedicated to all the incarcerated people in North Carolina who will eventually be released back into our communities. As part of that commitment, we believe that reentry begins the moment someone is incarcerated. My name is April Barber Scales.
And I'm Judy Van Wyk. In today's episode, we're going to take a look into the all-too-common intersection between homelessness and incarceration. In 2024, 1 in 4 people in North Carolina's prisons were released without a place to live or lay their head. That's according to a housing assessment presented by the newly formed Joint Reentry Council established by Governor Cooper.
On top of a critical housing shortage in this country, formerly incarcerated people face barriers that make it particularly hard to find housing. First of all, many landlords won't accept tenants with a felony. Also, there are many people who can't go home because their family can't or won't take them, or because they don't want them to return to the neighborhood that got them in trouble. Finally, people who've been convicted of a sexual offense are barred from living near a school or church, and many transition houses often refuse them.
Without stable housing, homelessness can easily become chronic, especially for people who struggle with substance use disorder or mental health issues. Last summer, I read a book about the suffering that accompanies chronic homelessness. It's called In the Gaps by Dr. Brian Klausner. Dr. Klausner is the executive director of Wake Med Community Health in Raleigh, and I think his book is an important read. As a physician, Brian Klausner has dedicated his career to treating homeless people, and as you'll hear, he regards our society's treatment of its homeless population as both cruel and wasteful. In August, I had an opportunity to interview Dr. Klausner, and I'm excited to share some of his insights and observations. Oh, and by the way, a quick note. When he mentions ACEs, ACES, that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Here's Dr. Klausner. Briefly, can you tell me how you got involved with working with the homeless?
In medical school, I went to Georgetown Medical School, and when I was there, became involved with a scholarship called the National Health Service Corps. They would pay year for year for med school, and then with the idea is after I graduated from residency, I'd give back in a medically neglected community. And so when I was done with my residency, after University of Chicago, I was looking at the list. There's all these exotic places and middle of nowhere places that would be awesome to go to. But my wife, we had 2 kids at the time, and she didn't necessarily want to end up in the middle of, Alaska or Guam or any place like that. So we found Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, and the location was amazing, but I was reluctant. I was, I think I was going in with a lot of commonly held stereotypes and beliefs and misconceptions around people who are experiencing homelessness. But long story short, first day or two, I completely fell in love with it for a lot of different reasons. It's just an incredible field of medicine. You're working with, I was just in awe of the patients, of what the reality actually was compared to my misconceptions and the stereotypes. And essentially just incredible people with incredible strength and incredible resilience, battling stuff that I didn't really understand. And as I got more familiar with the common battles and the underlying root causes of homelessness, it just led me to become more fascinated by the root cause and the pathologies, but also more fascinated by the human resilience that I saw on a daily basis, how they were battling things that I couldn't even imagine.
What were the misconceptions that you had, that you took in, that you learned were wrong?
I think that homelessness was kind of self-inflicted, right? So I wanted to help people that, quote unquote, wanted to help themselves. And so I think what I had, my stereotype of, hey, homelessness for the most part is self-inflicted, really represented that larger stereotype that we see in society. And that's what quickly got debunked for me almost instantly.
We could probably talk for hours about the root causes themselves, but since we brought it up, can we talk about that a little bit?
Each individual is different. When we're talking about as homelessness is hitting record highs nationally right now, the main cause of that is just for years. We've known that homelessness was going to get worse. We saw that trajectory of where wage growth wasn't even close to keeping up with housing cost. On one end, affordable housing is one of the main causes of homelessness. Now, for me specifically, I've spent my career working with chronic homelessness, which is defined as over 12 months in the context of a disability or mental health or physical health disability. And so the etiologies there, people who kind of get trapped in homelessness, we see much more of a prevalence of mental health, of addiction. One of the greatest things that I've learned over the years, and kind of my greatest aha moments in my career, has been really the impact that so often the root causes tracks all the way back to childhood with adverse childhood events, and that's not some abstract philosophical science supports that, is when so many of my patients experience these, really traumatic childhoods with high levels of what we call adverse child events, so trauma as kids, sexual abuse, physical abuse, death of a loved one, divorce, incarcerated parents, things that when they were kids made their developing brains just swim in cortisol. And when developing brains are swimming in cortisol, there's going to be outcomes because of that. It's going to set health trajectories and certain patterns that sometimes can be very stubborn. So when we did a study of 150 local participants in this incredible nonprofit that we work with, it's a residential program for people experiencing both homelessness and addiction. And we looked at the prevalence of adverse childhood events. And in the normal, wider population, about 10, it depends on what study you're looking at, 8 to 10 to 12% of a population will have 4 or more adverse childhood events. In this population of 150 men and women, it was about 74%. And why that's important is because people with 4 or more adverse childhood events are much more likely to develop mental health issues, substance abuse issues, suicidal ideation, and even chronic diseases, heart disease, cancers. And it goes back to what I was saying, is like when a kid, it grows up swimming in cortisol, dealing with stress on a daily basis, just trying to survive on a daily basis, their physiology is going to be different and their brains are going to develop differently, and they're going to seek out comfort through addiction, and they're going to struggle with mental health. And so that's really when we talk about root causes. I think we have to be really, really careful with being too judgmental and lazily blaming individuals for a lot of things that they're experiencing or going through. Because again, it's not only just inhumane, it's just intellectually lazy, and it's not addressing the actual root causes. We've had a lot of success going back with trauma therapy and going back to address root causes in the effort to improve their outcomes moving forward.
That brings up lots of questions, but it also just brings us right to the steps of the intersection between incarceration and homelessness. How do you see that as a practitioner? What do you see in terms of that intersection?
Yeah, it's a really frustrating topic for me. I think it's one of mutual failure. I think our healthcare system fails to address a lot of the mental health issues and a lot of the trauma that leads to symptoms that manifest themselves in illegal activity and in criminal activity. And then I think the criminal justice system will a lot of times fail patients in terms of when they're getting out, reconnecting them to resources, reconnecting them to mental health providers, again, if that's the root cause and you're not efficiently addressing root causes, a lot of times you're just exacerbating those. And so we see a lot of our patients with, and again, I keep saying it, but forget the humanistic argument. It's an efficient, problem solving. If the root cause that leads to a lot of this, criminal activity, if people in jails and prisons have a much higher prevalence of adverse childhood events and stress and trauma, let's not re-trigger them. Let's not exacerbate the root causes. And I think a lot of times that's what incarceration does. It's deliberately punitive, but it expensively exacerbates instead of efficiently addresses. And again, there's a lot of science. We understand, we're starting to better understand exactly what that is and why that happens, and the neuroanatomy and how, you trigger the reactive system. And when it's reactive, or the limbic system, the brain gets triggered, it's going to lead to reaction. It's going to lead to potential violence. It's going to lead to aggression. And if we keep with patterns that continue to do that, it's just not going to get better. And so it's not only bad for the patient who's suffering from these things, but it's also not safe for our society. We need to be better at addressing the mental health and the root causes so we can have better outcomes. There's so many people in prison right now, not bad people, not jerks, not violent, but just that react and are there because of crimes of reaction. We won't even get to the crimes of survival. Like if you're a person who's homeless and doesn't have a place to stay, and you're doing acts of daily living, sleeping, urinating out in public, those crimes of survival, that land people, that's even more ridiculous. But the idea is there's a lot of inefficiencies in how we manage stress, trauma, chronic homelessness that land people unnecessarily and very expensively in jail.
Working with the homeless and working with really high-risk populations in general requires a holistic approach. You've got to have mental health and all these other different and social workers. So you formed a team. I mean, was there anything going on in terms of working with the homeless here before you came?
Yeah, there was one of my bigger role models, probably from a career perspective, was this guy, Dr. Jim Hardy, who was doing a lot of the work that we were doing up in Boston, but it was just him and a small team, and they were amazing. The work we do with healthcare for the homeless is up in Boston, and what we developed here is always team-based. And it goes to a broader stat that medicine doesn't like to talk about too much, but of the main things that impact health outcomes is not what we do in the hospitals or the clinics. It affects, if you look at the studies, 20 or 30% of health outcomes is involved with direct medical care in clinics, hospitals. The vast majority are the things that patients deal with on a daily basis in their lives, behaviors and, diet and exercise and addiction and stress, especially stress. So if you're truly going to improve health outcomes, then you truly have to address what drives health outcomes. And that's not doctors, and that's not hospitals. It's working with patients in the context of their daily lives to maximize their outcomes. And so that's where our teams are heavily case management, social workers, definitely, myself as a medical provider, we have behavioral health providers, therapists, community health workers, more and more. Honestly, like most of our team are social workers and care. So, they're going underneath bridges, they're meeting with patients. And so a lot of times I tend to take my direction more from them than vice versa.
You wrote a book, In the Gaps. Why did you write that book?
I never wanted to write a book. It's quite the process. It was awesome. I loved it. In fact, I struggled to finalize it and publish it just because I knew I probably never was going to do it again. And I was having so much fun doing it. But it's really, I guess it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. I think there's a lot of dangerous misconceptions about the reality of homelessness, individuals experiencing homelessness, individuals in the justice system. Like, we're off in terms of how we view and how we think about root causes, and being in medical field and kind of medical, administrative roles. There's a real high cost to that as well. So, we, as I say in the book, we are tolerating a lot of avoidable and expensive human suffering. And if you think about that, we're tolerating a lot of avoidable and expensive human suffering. That's unacceptable, both from a humanistic perspective and just from an efficiency perspective. As our healthcare system is pushing $5 trillion, as our justice systems and jails and prisons are the largest mental health facilities in our state, there's a cost to our inefficiency. And the root causes of the inefficiencies, I think, are a misunderstanding. You can't solve what you don't truly understand. And that's why I started out the book is understanding a mechanism is everything. So that's really why I wrote the book, is to, I just had a unique experience day in, day out throughout my career to be involved with this. And you gain understanding and insight just out of experience. And I just felt like an obligation to share those findings, in effort to hopefully evolve how we approach some of these social issues that are reaching record levels, and a lot of people are dying and suffering, and there's a lot of money being hemorrhaged because of it.
You mentioned this, but I think it's important. The harm that is done with labeling people.
Yeah. So, in the book, we talk about the reflexive dehumanization. And what that is, it was looking at research from Dr. Lasana Harris. His focus, he's fascinating, but his focus is how have humans accepted atrocities against other humans over the course of history. And one of the big studies he did caught my eye because it involved homelessness. So it was at Yale, and they took, I think it was undergrads, and they stuck them underneath a functional MRI. Now, a functional MRI is really cool. It studies how the brain works. So you go under a functional MRI and say, raise your left finger or your left index finger, and you'll see a part of the brain light up. Or think of a scary thought, and you'll see the part of the brain in charge of scary thoughts. And so what they did is, in this functional MRI, they would just flash pictures for about a second of different stereotypical pictures of people in the community, teachers, milkmen, businessmen, whatever it is. And one was a quote unquote kind of a typical, stereotypical homeless addict. And what they saw, the prefrontal cortex, which is where we humanize and love and think, and would light up right away with every picture besides homeless addict. And with homeless addict, that part of the brain, that humanization part of the brain of the prefrontal cortex, did not light up. What lit up was an area part of the brain that lights up when we see inanimate objects like chairs or, pieces of wood or whatever. And then also a part of the brain in charge of conflict resolution. So it was fascinating because it showed, and what he was talking about, to get to your question of labels, what he was mentioned in the study is leaders that push atrocities against others will use labels, so Hitler called, Jewish people rats and vermins, and Rwanda was cockroaches. And so labels and stereotypes can be convenient tools to facilitate dehumanization.
I have one more question, yes. And that is, what have I left out? What do you think is really important that you would like to impart?
Again, I think selfishly as we are addressing chronic homeless. I talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but I think it's a growing problem. The numbers are rising. It's a complex problem. But like you said earlier, it's all about problem solving. And I mean, life is about problem solving. And when you're problem solving, it's two things, right? If you're going to problem solve, you have to understand root causes so you can efficiently address them. So step one, understand root causes. And then number two, solve them in ways that are efficient and consistent with your values and beliefs. And especially now in 2025, I think if people can maintain their ability for autonomy of thought and be able to not get torn away from their deeply held personal values and beliefs in an era where there's more and more manipulated on both sides of the aisle, manipulated polarization and hate, is to stay true and really, especially when it comes to issues around how we treat and how we help, our fellow residents and citizens, just to stay true to that. And hearing some of the narratives is just to stay true to, your underlying principles and values and beliefs, because I think that's it's going to be increasingly important as we see homelessness on the rise across our country.
April, there's a lot to digest from what he said. I know this. After meeting Dr. Klausner and reading his book, I'll never view people who are homeless the same way. April, you're a peer support specialist at Freedom House, and as such, you work with homeless people all the time. How does what Brian had to say resonate with you?
Well, you can definitely not judge a book by its cover. I met a lady who was not on my caseload, but I was curious to know what her story was. She happened to be in a wheelchair and had a dog. And just at a glance, I had a predisposed thought of what I thought her story would be. But long story short, what her story was, she actually was fleeing a domestic violence situation, was not the one holding the purse strings, couldn't afford to pay rent anywhere else, and ended up being homeless.
Oh, that is such a frustrating and sad story.
Yeah, it really is. She has good spirits, and luckily about 90 days ago, she was able to get housing.
Talk about cruel and wasteful.
Yeah.
The next gentleman we're going to hear from was living in a transition house after being homeless for well over a decade. I met Paul Davis through his roommate at Jubilee House here in Durham, and I was surprised that he was more than willing to talk to me, and he didn't hesitate to tell me about living in the woods or his time in prison. This is his story. When did you first become introduced to drugs?
I was probably somewhere in between 16 and 18.
And what was that like? What was that introduction like?
It started off with marijuana, eased into occasional Percocet, eased into occasional powder cocaine, that eased into crack, then the crack eased into methamphetamine.
Did you go to jail or prison at all?
Yes, I've been to prison. I done lost count. I would say at least 4 times, if not more. The last bid was, I think it was 2016, something of the nature. I done right at 5 years.
5 years. What did you do 5 years for?
I had absconded, which means run from parole. I stayed on the run real close to a year. I ended up getting caught. While I was incarcerated, I caught my first drug charge, which was what they call, when you're in the system, what they call $5 ride, which is Suboxone strip they cut into little pieces about the size of a match head. They done a locker search, found it, had to go to street court, and the mixture of the time for absconding parole mixed with the possession of a controlled substance within a correction facility. I ended up doing real close to 5 years.
When were you first homeless?
All right. I'll say 2010. I had got locked up, got out. While I was locked up, me and my girlfriend had broke up. When I got out, I stayed at the homeless shelter for a little while. I didn't like that. A lot of homosexuality, a lot of bed bugs, a lot of roaches, rats running around the parking lot, so forth, so on. I said, the heck with this. If I got to put up with this and I'm supposed to be free or not incarcerated, but if I got to put up with this, I might as well be in the woods in a tent, and that's exactly what I done.
Wow, okay. So you decided to camp out. How long did that last?
Off and on for like I would say in between 12 to 15 years. You know, a break because of me getting locked up or me doing tent work and having a little bit of money to get a motel room for 2-3 weeks, or 3-4 people go in on a motel room and you might stay a month and a half, you know, whatever the heck, or running from Tom, Dick, and Harry's couch to couch, couch to couch, you know, that type thing.
Were you alone in your tent in the woods, or did you try to stay with other people, or how did, kind of describe that life for me?
Sometimes I was by myself. Sometimes I had people around me. Through the drug addiction or the street life, from time to time running into females or running into different people, and either they were homeless or they needed somewhere to stay, and sometimes they stayed with me, or sometimes they had went and got a tent and put their tent beside my tent, so forth, so on.
How did you cope with that? How did you cope with living out in the woods?
You got no choice but to cope. I mean, if you're homeless, you're homeless. You got to do it, I reckon with a mixture of me being incarcerated and me being homeless, it become natural, especially with the drug usage. A lot of drugs was used to block feelings, emotions, so forth, so on.
Can you describe it at all? Like what did you do during the day, or did you go someplace to take a shower, or how did it work? Because I don't think that many people have ever spoken to anybody who's been homeless.
Going to churches, going to shelters. When I was homeless, there was a convenience store in the neighborhood, and I go up there and go on the highway and panhandle on the highway, what they call fly sign. Actually, you're asking, or some people say, call it begging for money. I would take the money and get like food, cigarettes, drinks. By me coming into the store where in the neighborhood where I was staying at, which was South Point in Durham, North Carolina. But by me coming in the store repeatedly, me and the manager become friends. And she used to look out for me. Every so often, she'd go to the dollar store, buy 3-4 bars of soap, 2-3 toothbrushes, toothpaste, all your hygienes. Or by me going to churches, to the clothing closet, getting canned goods or bags of beans, cooking in the microwave. Because of me being locked up, I become accustomed or knowledgeable about cooking in the microwave, cooking on the grill. My friend that was running the store, they had hot sandwiches, and within like 3-4 hours of them being in the hot case, they would have to so-called throw them away, write them off and throw them away. But sometimes, instead of finding their way to the dumpster, they found their way to my stomach.
What was the hardest thing about being homeless?
Lying to my parents for about I would say at least 6 years. I was in a tent, and they thought I was at either a friend's house or a female's house. From time to time, I would get motel rooms or be with somebody, and we chip in and get a motel room. I would always say, me and so-and-so got in an argument and I left, or come up with some kind of lie to cover up a lie. You know how that situation goes. Once when you tell a lie, you got to tell another lie. It's a snowball type effect.
Were you close to your parents?
I reckon.
You maintained a connection with them.
My dad, yeah, my mom, halfway. But as the saying goes, he's a mama's boy, or that's a mama's girl. Well, I was more of a daddy's boy. At one time, I wouldn't open up, or I wouldn't discuss things, or I would hide things from Dad. But once when I found out that Dad, because he was the manager of Winn-Dixie Food Line, or owning different convenience stores, he knew street people or the street life, far as the gang banging, the drug dealing, selling ball tickets, selling moonshine, all he was used to or knew all kinds of people or all kinds of ways of life or means of supporting your life. Once when I finally realized that, we became extremely tight, and there was no secrets or no ducking and dodging.
So you told me a story on the phone about boosting. Was that one of the ways you survived?
Yes.
Can you tell us what boosting is and how you survived boosting?
Boosting is going into different stores and taking merchandise. Not necessarily all the time. When a person does boosting, are they addicted to drugs? But a lot of times they're addicted to some type of drugs, whether it be alcohol, marijuana, heroin, fentanyl, so forth, so on. A lot of times, drug dealers buy the merchandise that has been boosted, but at times, your ordinary Joe Blow or Susie Q in the neighborhood might work at Duke Hospital, might work at IBM. You'd be surprised of what society calls normal or well-to-do citizens of a city or a state that'll buy, just an example, $100 worth of stolen steak or $50 worth of laundry detergent.
You've been clean for a while now?
I would say 4.5, maybe 6 months.
That's a good amount of time. Is that the longest you've been clean?
I would say yeah, because even when I was incarcerated, there was K2 every now and then. There was marijuana. Every now and then there was Suboxone, Subutex. Sometimes they were making what they call hooch or buck, which is like where you take like Kool-Aid or orange juice, yeast rolls, honey buns, fruit cocktail. You throw numerous mixtures into some kind of container or a trash bag and let it sit like a week and a half. And then you strain it and then you drink the juice or the liquid, and it's just like Jack Daniels, Budweiser, like drinking alcohol on the street, but you're locked up.
So how did you come to Jubilee House?
When I was on parole, they referred me to CJRC, and then CJRC, one of the guys from CJRC said, I know a transition house, and he brought me to Jubilee.
What is it like being at Jubilee?
At times, it can be difficult because of being so street or so I reckon you could say used to being locked up, or you got that locked up mentality or the street mentality. Through the years, there's been numerous, and I mean numerous shootings right here in the neighborhood. And there's been numerous times they be shooting, and I've been right there. So when I say street or street mentality, that's what I mean. Accustomed to the streets. So many times I've been in the house and they get to shooting and people be running everywhere, in the closet, crawling under the bed. I'll be standing right there smoking a cigarette or standing right there at the stove flipping my bacon or my cheeseburgers. You know, it's normal. It's like saying, hello, my name's Billy Bob, you know. But yet there's bullets flying everywhere. But to me, it's normal, you know, because I've been in the streets. I've been locked up so damn much. I've woke up in the middle of the night to screaming and hollering and blood all over the floor or all over the mattress.
If you had something that you wanted to tell people about your experience being homeless or about the people that they see who are homeless, what would that be?
It's, to start off with, it can be hard and challenging, but you find ways, or you get the hang of things.
You adapt.
Yeah, you adapt. I think with the mixture of being locked up, going to Cub Scouts or Webelos, used to hiking or going camping, but I never thought that was going to be a way of life or what I would do in life. By having a tent and calling that your home, I never thought it would be like that. But I reckon that's why I fell into the groove.
When I interviewed Paul in October, he was trying to find a job, and he was working to get some old traffic tickets expunged from his records so that he could drive the van that he inherited from his father. Still, you know, April, it's going to take more than just a place to live and a job to deal with the trauma that he's experienced living on the streets.
I can only hope that Paul realizes how far he's came and doesn't revert back to what he knows, which is living on the streets. I had one of my clients who had been previously homeless tell me that he had to reframe his mind from that quote unquote homeless mentality.
And that takes a lot of support.
It does. It takes a lot of support, and it just takes a lot of self-awareness and self-advocacy also. Well, we've only scratched the surface in the prison to homelessness pipeline. It's a complicated problem, and without funding and a sustained effort from state and federal government, it's not going to be solved anytime soon.
And we'll tackle this issue in future stories because it is a huge issue. In the meantime, if you have any ideas for the 98% life after prison, you can reach out to our website, www.the98percentlifeafterprison.com.
And stay tuned for our next show where we finally hear from some women who are transitioning from NCCIW. That's North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women in Raleigh. Thank you for joining us.
And we'll see you next time.